Welcome, everyone, to another edition of Chatting with the Cougars. I'm the host, Everett German, and we have a very special guest on with us today. I know we've been catching up with all of our coaches at the College of Charleston, as well as Athletic Director Matt Roberts. But today we're going to talk to the boss, the Caa Commissioner, entering his fourth year at the helm. It's Joe D'Antonio, also known as Joey D. And Joey D, welcome to Chatting with the Cougars.
Well, Everett, it's great to see you virtually, and thank you for having me on the show. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, I know, Joey D, again, you're entering your fourth year, and I think it's safe to say, Joey D, that year four has really been different, going back to March, and I guess that's probably, Joey D, a good place to start. Well, you know what, Joey D, because I like starting on a high note. Before we talk about everything that started in March, how have you, your family, and the folks there at the Caa office, how have you guys been over the past 3 or 4 months?
Well, we're doing okay, Everett. From a family standpoint, we're doing fine. We've literally had the whole family together at the house here in the New England area for, since mid-March. And this is probably with college-age children and my daughter just finishing up high school and my travel schedule, this is probably the longest we've been together at one time for, maybe the last 10 to 15 years. So that's been, it's been fun. We've had a lot of laughs. I'd be lying if I tell you we don't have an occasional little disagreement, but those have been, to be honest with you, those have been few and far between. And it's really been a lot of fun to be able to spend some extra time with the kids, with my wife, and we've genuinely had a really enjoyable experience just being together. The conference staff is doing great. We have some incredible people, very talented, that do a great job. We did have a couple of our staff members right at the very beginning that did contract the virus. Very fortunate to report that they're all doing well. The conference office as a whole does remain closed in the Richmond area, and we are all continuing to work virtually, but certainly feel as though that our service to the membership has not suffered in any way, and we are continuing, I think, to serve the membership at a very high level. So very fortunate to report everyone's doing really well.
All right, Joey D, so we go back to March. The men's basketball championships just had ended, the first time ever there in Washington, D.C., and I guess, another positive. Joey D, talk about that experience. The first time there, a beautiful facility, home of the Washington Mystics, and it just seemed all in all, Joey D, it was a pretty good time there in D.C. for the men's basketball championships.
Well, I thought the experience there, Everett, I would agree with you, was very positive for our member institutions and for the conference. A lot of credit to our staff for preparing to run a tournament at really a new venue for all of us. A lot of credit to our basketball staffs, our administrators at our institutions for working closely with us in that organization. And certainly a lot of credit to the folks with Events DC and the arena that really went above and beyond to put on, I think, a first-class event and most importantly, provide a first-class experience to our student athletes, administrators, and our fans. That was really right at the turn, right? You referenced this in your question a little bit, right at the turn of where things going to start to get really chaotic as it related to the virus. And I think we handled situations appropriately. We made it through the tournament. We crowned the champion, and we're really excited about the relationship that we're building and continue to build with the folks at the new arena, and certainly looking forward to things, quote unquote, getting back to normal and us being able to get back to that location for future years of running our tournament there.
And Joey D, just simply, I think it was maybe 2 or 3 days after Hofstra won the championship, you then turned your attention to the women's tournament. But of course, that really never got a chance to play itself out because of the virus. And so I'm going to kind of ask you as a commissioner, Joy, to kind of take us through that. I guess it would be been a Tuesday, a Wednesday, a Thursday. What was going on behind the scenes in terms of the NCAA, commissioners of all the basketball conferences? There were tournaments going on. What was those, I guess, 48, 72 hours like before finally the final decision was made to stop everything?
Well, it was really a very interesting period of time to start. We got into Elon for the women's basketball tournament, as you said. The folks at Elon and their staff were tremendous, as well as the conference staff and folks from our member institutions, and just kind of understanding the period of time that indeed we were in, and that we were trying to manage things as best we could. We did play our opening round games, which I believe took place on either Tuesday or Wednesday. I think it was Tuesday. Opening round games on Tuesday. Excuse me. I remember, Everett, very distinctly going to bed on Wednesday night. And prior to going to bed is when the Rudy Gobert incident had happened in the NBA. And the NBA had made the decision that they were going to, I think at that time, it was postpone everything for 30 days. We're obviously a lot more advanced than 30 days right now. But I think their original announcement was they were going to postpone things for 30 days. And I remember right before I went to bed, I went over to my computer and I sent an email to our head coaches and our athletic directors and just simply said that we needed to be prepared tomorrow, that if the NCAA made an announcement that they were going to be canceling the men's and women's basketball championships, that our women's basketball championship would immediately conclude at that point. And ultimately, that's not how it played out. But what we saw play out the next day were other we were obviously having conversations about, should we proceed, should we not proceed. We saw other entities around us, such as the ACC men's tournament, going through. They were about a couple hours down the road, hour down the road, like in Greensboro. They began having conversations about if they were going to postpone. And, essentially, you just saw a bunch of conferences at that point ultimately say, we have postponed or canceled our men's or women's basketball tournaments, depending on where the conference was in the structure of their tournaments at that time. And then shortly after that, you saw the NCAA make the cancellation of the basketball tournaments. You then saw several conferences such as ours make an announcement that for the present time, we were postponing the playing of spring championships. Then you saw the NCAA make an announcement that all spring championships had been canceled. And then obviously you saw many conferences such as ours make an announcement that our spring championships were also canceled. So, in a matter of a very short period of time, all of those things played out right in that mid-March period.
Yeah, Joey D., how difficult is it? Because one thing that the CAA prides itself on is really giving our student athletes in the CAA an opportunity to experience that championship feel, to be able to feel that excitement of being a Division I athlete. You think about the basketball championships, but then you look at sports like baseball and softball and golf, all those spring sports. How difficult is it to, I guess, balance between, hey, we need to, quote unquote, protect the students in these situations, but also give these kids an opportunity to play that they've deserved and worked so hard for?
Yeah, those are difficult situations, certainly, Everett, as you referenced. I think that, as we've approached these situations, especially going back to that spring period, we were first and foremost focused on everyone's health, safety, and well-being. Once the NCAA, as a governing body, made the announcement that those spring championships at their level were being canceled, and there was no opportunity for our conference or any of the other Division I conferences to send a representative to that championship, that essentially sent the message that those sports and those championships for the spring were going to have to be canceled. And that's a tough situation, because I think you've hit the nail right on the head. we're not sending people to the moon here on a daily basis, but I think we all have to realize that in our corner of the world, and especially when you look at the student athletes and the coaches and the time, effort, and energy they put in and the dedication that they have to what they do, to have somebody all of a sudden then tell them, well, the season's been canceled. There is not going to be the opportunity to have, like you referenced, an experience at a conference championship. There's not going to be an opportunity to work towards that incredible rewarding of getting a bid to an NCAA championship. Those are difficult and devastating situations, and should certainly not be taken lightly. But as I had a chance to circle back and talk with almost every head coach of those spring sports very soon after these decisions were made, while they were all to a person disappointed, I think they also understood that we made decisions in the best interest of the health, safety, and well-being of not only themselves, but obviously also their student athletes. So I think disappointment was certainly there, but reality of, especially at that time, having to make the right decision certainly was also very prevalent.
So, no, Joey D, we fast forward to now. It just came out a short while ago that the CAA has decided to cancel all the fall sports, just playing it safe. And I want to ask you, Joey D, what are some of the challenges for you as the commissioner? Because, yeah, you're governing the entire CAA, but, of course, you got teams in South Carolina, North Carolina, in Virginia, and, New York, all over. And everybody has different rules and regulations by their government. Also, we know about the hot spots. Some are bigger or more prevalent than the others. As a commissioner, talk about those challenges of trying to make a decision that suits everybody, even though everybody's not in the same boat.
Well, I think it's important, Everett, in answering this question to just go back a little bit in time and for everyone to understand that the CAA full member conference made up of 10 institutions in 8 states. We've been talking about flexibility really since the beginning of our planning process as we started to look at what a regular season schedule in the fall could look like and actually in the spring. And what our championships in the fall and spring could look like. And we put together a model titled EFM, the acronym that stands for the Extreme Flexibility Model. And under the Extreme Flexibility Model, we essentially were allowing our member institutions, both in the fall and spring, to create their own regular season schedules. Some of those schedules could involve playing other CAA members. Some of those schedules may involve playing a limited number of CAA members, depending on where you were geographically and what type of travel restrictions, as you bring up, your state may have been under. So I really think that we came up with a solid plan and course of action to deal with some of the geographical challenges that you mentioned, while also focusing on everyone's health and safety, and also understanding that from a resource standpoint, getting on airplanes, staying in hotels, et cetera, really wasn't a prudent thing to be doing in a period of time where we are trying to keep everybody safe and also maximize cost savings as it related to travel expenses. So that EFM model was in place for the regular season. We then took that one step forward in a period of time where we saw conferences either canceling conference championships or reducing the number of teams coming to conference championships. We put a plan together that we called it the All-Comers Conference Championship, where we were going to allow all of our teams from all of our sports to come to a conference championship. So to give you an example, in men's and women's soccer, usually we only have 6 teams from the conference that would come to the conference championship. We had already planned for this fall, if we were going to have a full fall championship, that we would have all of the teams come, 10 and 9 respectively. So then pivot, like you said, to the announcement that we made. And the announcement or the statement that was put out, unanimously approved and put out by the CAA Board of Directors, made up of our president. So, for example, in the in the aspect of College of Charleston, President Shu would be a member of the board of directors. Those 10 presidents put out a statement that essentially said, we're going to continue on that line of flexibility, and we're going to allow, in unprecedented times, such as we're in right now, for each institution to be able to decide, are they going to kind of cut things off for the fall and look to maybe play some fall sports in the spring, or is the institution going to continue down a path of trying to pursue playing fall sports? And we can get into the ins and outs of that in a minute, but we arrived at that decision and gave each institution the flexibility on their own to be able to make decisions, Everett, in these unprecedented times that were really the best decision for their institution when doing what I would call a totality of the circumstances analysis on a variety of different factors, including what is best for both their on and off campus communities in the geographical region where their institution sits. And when we made that announcement, we then had immediately the 10 institutions issue their own announcement. And what we've seen to date is 6 institutions say, we think it's best right now for us to shut things down in the fall. And we've had 4 institutions that have said, we think it's best for us right now to continue forward and see if playing sports in the fall is a possibility. And those 4 have been College of Charleston, as you know, UNCW, James Madison, and Elon. And I'm certainly happy to dive into any other topics off of that you'd like to.
You talk about that, Joey D, and all those teams are somewhat south of all the teams in the conference. So I guess in a way it's kind of a good thing because, well, it's a bus ride to Wilmington for Charleston, it's a bus ride to Elon, and a nice little short trip there to JMU. So in that aspect, obviously it's a good thing. Now I have to ask you, that being said, as we all know, conference champions are the ones that represent the conference at the NCAAs. So how would the conference handle that situation? Should there be, let's just say, let's go with soccer, like you just talked about, there be an NCAA soccer championship. How would y'all go about determining which team represents the CAA?
So go back to what I said a few minutes ago in terms of the EFM, the Extreme Flexibility Model. As it relates to those 4 institutions, they'd be on their own to put together a regular season schedule, first of all. And then as of right now, Everett, I think it's important for everyone to know, this is as of today, the day that we're doing this interview, the NCAA has not done anything in terms of moving their fall championships. They haven't canceled them. They haven't postponed them. They haven't moved them to the spring. So everything is going forward in the NCAA world as of right now. So if that were to continue, if there were to be a fall NCAA championship in soccer, and if we had 4 institutions that felt as though it was appropriate for them to continue to move forward, we would support those institutions. Number one, at the conference level, that's the conference office's job, is to support its member institutions. And we would then come up with a organized plan as to how we would conduct a championship, a conference championship, for those 4 institutions in the fall sports that each of them sponsor. So, for example, all 4 of the schools that I mentioned, they all sponsor men's soccer. They all sponsor women's soccer, just as an example. And we would have those, more than likely, those 4 teams compete in a semifinal and a final, designate a conference champion, and that champion would represent the CAA in the NCAA championship in the fall. And then similarly, for our other 6 institutions that chose to say, we want to explore playing our fall sports potentially in the spring, well, you can't have 2 NCAA champions or 2 NCAA championships. So the NCAA is not going to run a soccer championship in the fall and in the spring. But what we certainly could do in supporting those other 6 institutions is, if they wanted to play some type of a conference tournament, let's say, or some type of conference event in the spring for their 6 schools, we would certainly support that endeavor as well.
All right, Joy D, let's talk about, of course, in Charleston, the big sport is it's basketball. And of course, today it's, we're in July, so a lot can happen between now and when basketball were to start there, hopefully in November. So what are some of the things that you are going to be looking for, or maybe the NCAA or just, colleges across the country in general in terms of basketball, and whether it starts in November or if we have just conference only play, and just kind of take us a little bit, if you've talked about it or thought about it, just the basketball landscape and what we potentially could see this upcoming season.
So I think it's important to note at the outset for basketball is that we are at the present time status quo. We haven't changed anything related to practice schedules. We haven't changed anything related to regular season game schedules. We haven't changed anything related to tournament schedules. So we are right now, today, scheduled to play the basketball season as you and your fans would see it laid out. I think it's important, Everett, for everyone to understand these two words. And I've talked about this since mid-April, and that is issues surrounding cost and complexity. And I think that not only in college athletics, but in our overall lives and in our livelihood here, living in the United States, I think we all hoped that when this all began in mid-March, as you've referenced several times this morning, I think we all hoped that by the time we got to a period of time here in mid to late July, that we would have seen the cost and complexity of dealing with issues surrounding COVID-19 significantly mitigate themselves. And the unfortunate reality that we're all dealing with, again, not in college athletics, but just in our own daily lives, that in many aspects, not only haven't those situations mitigated themselves, in many aspects, they've exacerbated themselves. And I really think that in order for us to have some semblance of a normal, quote unquote, normal basketball season and be able to pull off what is now scheduled, we're going to need to see some changes in the cost and complexity of how we're dealing with COVID-19. And I think we all hope that over time, those changes will hopefully include the possibility of having a vaccine, the possibility of more accurate and timely testing that could be worked into the mainstream of how we're all operating. And I think we're hopeful that with basketball being a little bit of a further runway down the road here, that we can get to that point and be able to play a whole basketball schedule within the basketball season. Now, if there are scenarios where we need to pivot, I do think that by the time we get to that point, I do think you'll see the membership as a whole pulled together as it relates to the sport of men's and women's basketball, so that maybe we don't have these one-off scenarios where one conference is announcing one thing, another conference is announcing something else. We're waiting to see if what announcement's going to come out today. I'd like to think, for the good of the enterprise, that when we get to that point, hopefully 2 to 3 to 4 months down the road, and we're talking about basketball, that we will be able to operate as one unit and be able to make some collective decisions as what's best for the enterprise and what's best for the sport.
Joey D, that's so interesting that you say that, because it seems like what you just said is not going on right now in terms of, college football. You have some conferences saying they're just going to, play conference only. You have some that still have not made a decision. And I know one of the big topics, and you just touched on it as well, is testing. In terms of the CAA, Joey D, will that be a mandate that will come down from the conference, or will that be each school left to do their own type of regulations in terms of testing for COVID-19?
Everett, those are situations that I would suggest to you we continue to explore daily and don't have a final decision yet. And that's simply because we're dealing with such drastic situations in each of the locales that we're in. And what's going to be important going forward is for member institutions to make sure that they are following, obviously, their state and local guidelines, and also following the guidelines that are implemented by their own member institutions. And as we continue, I should say, to get a clear understanding of what some of those guidelines look like, as we continue to get a clear understanding and hopefully see an improvement in what the testing options are around the country, that's when I think we'll be able to make some decisions as it relates to hopefully the playing of spring and winter sports, as to whether or not there will be some type of uniform testing standard that will be required in order to play either conference games or non-conference games around the country.
Joey D, when you hear conferences come out, mostly the Power 5 conferences, and say things like, hey, we're just going to play conference-only schedules. As a non-Power 5 commissioner, does that scare you? Because obviously we know mid-majors, you get those money games, it kind of helps the athletic department, and it almost seems like the Power 5 sometimes seems to isolate themselves and leave the little man out. When you hear things of that as a mid-major commissioner, in terms of just non-Power 5, do those types of talks concern you, and are those concerning going forward, as hopefully that will not be the trend going on after this?
Well, let me begin by saying that I believe that most of your viewers are probably aware that the CAA has another entity to it. The CAA does have the CAA Football Conference. It's a separate entity from the full member conference. It's comprised of 12 members. Those 12 members are part of 4 other Division I conferences. So the 12 members are comprised of members from the CAA, America East, the Big East, and the Atlantic 10 Conference. Those schools that have football in those conferences come together to make up the CAA Football Conference. And some of our schools, Everett, that were scheduled to play non-conference games against FBS opponents from those conferences were affected by those announcements, because those games essentially were removed from the schedule. And that conference, the CAA Football Conference, has similarly made a decision that the schedule has been canceled. The CAA football schedule has been canceled for the fall. We are exploring the option of playing in the spring, football in the spring. And we've also made an announcement that the board of directors did affirm that institutions on their own could pursue playing an independent football schedule if they chose to do so. The specific answer to your question is this. We are in unprecedented times right now. We're dealing with a situation that very few people, I mean, you'd have to be over 100 right now to have ever experienced anything like this in your lifetime, going back to the pandemic that took place in the early 1900s. You'd have to be over 100 to have ever experienced anything like this. I think the country, in different parts of the country, are trying to do the best they can to manage under these unprecedented times. People are making decisions. Entities such as conferences are making decisions that they feel as though are the best decision for their conference. And I really think that we should be taking an approach of respecting people for making those decisions if they feel as though those decisions are best for them. So if some of these Autonomy 5 conferences feel as though the best decision for their conference, the health, safety, and welfare of their coaches and student athletes for right now is to play just a conference schedule, I don't hold that against them, number one, and I don't look at these decisions as being precedent-setting in any way, because I think it's tough to say that you're making precedent-setting decisions when you're making these kind of decisions in unprecedented times. So I remain optimistic that we as an association can continue to work together in many of these regards. I just think, again, these are special and unique circumstances that require special and unique decisions.
I think it's safe to say, Joey, that the CAA has by far handled this the best. In terms of non-Power 5 conferences, giving those schools just that flexibility to have that. And as you mentioned, some schools have taken advantage and will do so. And as a commissioner, I guess from a Charleston perspective, I just want to say, thank you. And I'm sure the Cougar Nation appreciates all that you have done, as well as the CAA staff, in giving just us the opportunity to do, as you said, what's best for us, because what's best for Charleston might not be the same, for Delaware. And I just think you are to be applauded for handling the situation, because, I mean, you said earlier, Joey, there's no right or wrong answer. No matter what you decide, someone's not going to be happy with the decision. But the most important thing is, I mean, you've put thought into it and you've made a decision. I think that says, a lot in these unprecedented times. And so I'm sure you're using that law degree, Joey D, because from a logistics standpoint, I can't imagine what you're having to deal with contracts and guarantees and the whole nine yards. What's that like? What's a day in the life of Joey D look like these days, having to deal with so much flexibility and so much change, on the fly?
Well, I'd be lying if I told you it hasn't been extremely stressful, number one. It's been extremely challenging, number two. And, again, we're just trying to make the best decisions that we possibly can, because there's not a blueprint for this. If there was a blueprint, then we'd all be making the same decisions and everybody would just kind of be going about their merry way. But again, I can't stress enough that I really feel as though everyone's trying to make the best decisions that need to be made for their own entity in such unprecedented times. And I do feel good about the fact that we as a conference have allowed our institutions to make those decisions and make those decisions based on their needs, their beliefs, the medical assessment that they're doing, and the specific understanding of the position that both their on-campus as well as their off-campus communities are in vis-a-vis to the relationship to the college as a whole. And I really feel as though that's very important. As a conference, Everett, it's very commonplace that we need to make decisions together. And you make decisions together. Sometimes schools agree, sometimes schools don't agree, but you all move forward, lockstep together. But, these are not decisions such as on an away basketball game, should the home team have 25 towels or 15 towels in the locker room? These are decisions. These are decisions that in many cases are impacting both the lives and the livelihood of a lot of people. And for that reason, as you've referenced, and I appreciate you saying that, the flexibility for our member institutions to be able to make the right and proper decisions for themselves in these unprecedented times, I really think has been crucial and very important to them.
Joey, you gotta make me think of something else again really fast. Talking about flexibility, is there, because we already know obviously the discussion about the sports, is there a drop dead date for winter sports? And what do I mean by that? Let's say looks like everything's good or not good, and the decision is made, but then a month later it says, well, you know what, it's not as bad. What's the flexibility going to look like, in basketball season? Or is it a situation to where you've made the decision, that's the decision regardless of what happens if things were to improve?
Well, what I would tell you, Everett, the commitment from my standpoint, and I believe every one of our athletic directors would tell you the same thing, our commitment right now is to make sure that in a very fluid situation, we're continuing to analyze on a day-to-day basis with our medical professionals on our campuses, what is the situation day-to-day. And we're going to continue to make the best possible decisions we can make for our member institutions and for the conference as a whole. And I think that the key next period of time is probably that end of September, beginning of October period, where at that point we'll need to have a focus on, okay, is basketball going to start on time? Does the schedule need to be delayed? Does the schedule need to potentially be modified? And I think that late September, early October period is when you'll see decisions need to be made on the winter sports and specifically on basketball.
All right, so Joey D, I guess the 4 schools that are going forward, I'm assuming they all have their men's basketball and women's basketball players back on campus. Obviously, I don't need specific numbers, but overall, how have things been going in terms of player safety, COVID or coronavirus cases, people testing positive? How's that been thus far?
Well, from what we can tell, Everett, again, this is a case-by-case situation that the schools are probably in a better position to answer than I am directly. But I give all of our schools credit, those that have decided to proceed forward and try to play, and even those other 6 schools that maybe just have students on their campus right now going through voluntary workouts. I know that, and I give our medical personnel and our strength and conditioning personnel certainly an awful lot of credit in a very difficult time of working through the policies and procedures on their campus in conjunction with working through the state and local policies and procedures that need to be implemented to make sure that their student athletes and staff are staying safe. And what I can tell you that I feel very confident in is that all 10 of our institutions are going over and above making sure that both their institutional as well as state and local mandates are being met as it relates to trying to keep everybody as safe as possible.
Well, Joey D, as always, I appreciate you, man. Every time I ask you to come on, whether it's on the radio or in this situation, you always graciously do it. So another solid conversation with you and just trying to educate us in terms of, what's going on, what's going to be taking place, some of the key things, that you're looking for. And, that word that just sticks in my mind is flexibility. And that's what we have. And hopefully everything will work out well and we can get through the fall and people will, be able to see that it can be done, and winter and spring will be able to actually have their season, especially spring, Joey D, considering those kids, the ones that are returning, didn't get a chance to play last year. So thank you so much, Joey D. I greatly appreciate it. And I always wrap these up, Joey D, with an opportunity in the event that I didn't cover something that you want to, get out or a message to Cougar Nation. I always give you that opportunity to kind of fill in the gaps should you feel the need.
Well, I'll end by saying this, Everett. First of all, it's always a pleasure to be with you, whether it's in this setting or whether it's courtside at halftime. So I really appreciate you having me on. And I'll tell Cougar Nation that this is what I'm hoping for. I'm hoping that we can get back to normal soon, that I personally can be back in Charleston at some point soon, soaking up some of that Charleston hospitality. I want to have my shorts and T-shirt on. And I want to be on that Ravenel Bridge going for a nice run because I like nothing better than that when I'm in Charleston.
Well, Joey D, you're known as the commissioner who likes to participate with the teams when you come to town. So, Joey D, we got, as you know, the Charleston Battery now co-tenants over at Patriots Point, and I'm sure you've seen the renovations, online, but to see them in person, it's pretty nice, Joey D. So if you want to come down to Patriots, maybe run over the Arthur Ravenel Bridge to Patriots Point to train with the soccer teams, I'm sure they would love to have you out there on the pitch, as they call it.
Let's do it, because if we can make that happen, we're in a much better spot than we are right now, that's for sure.
That sounds good. Joey D, thanks again, man. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Everett. Hope you guys have a great rest of the day.
That's Joe D'Antonio, the commissioner of the CAA, joining us here on Chatting with the Cougars, giving us a little insight into, what's just going on in college athletics and more specifically, what's going on in the CAA. So we appreciate the commissioner joining us. And as always, we thank you for watching Chatting with the Cougars.